Why go Dawless? That's a weird question, right? Why go Dawless? Especially in today's day and age when tech and computing and whatnot is incredible. And I'm sure that statement won't age well, but the same could be said for instruments and synthesizers. Things are getting smaller, faster, easier to use, stronger, all the other words in that Daft Punk song. But joking aside, I do ask myself this question almost daily at this point, which is why do I choose to go Dawless? And I kind of, boiled it down to a couple points, I think. So, yeah, let's get into it. Okay, let's clear the air a little bit. I do use a DAW once in a while for specific things and specific needs. Rolling everything back, I started making music as a young child or a kid in a marching band, right? I went through all the typical band stuff, percussion, trombone, violin, and eventually got into like a band, like I guess you could say a rock band. Sound like a boomer saying that, but a typical rock band. I played guitar, played bass and whatnot. And I quickly realized getting synthesizers and drum machines to agree on my weird ideas was a lot easier to do than getting a bunch of human beings to agree on those weird ideas. So with that, the hunt for these devices and these machines began. This search for these devices and gear ultimately led me to the DAW Reason, and I fell in love with Reason. I used it relentlessly, and it was so cool. Show it off to all your friends, hit tab, have the whole rack swing around, and you can see all the little virtual cables hanging around. If you haven't seen that before, I guess it's probably so dumb to look at now, but at the time it was awesome. But in that, I still kind of felt like I wanted more from making music. And then I kind of started exploring DAWs or DAWs, and I eventually found Ableton's Live, and I love Live, and I still do, and I still use it to this day. But I realized quickly after using Ableton for a while that I was performing my tracks more than I was actually playing them in, I guess, or arranging. I guess that's the term for it. I wanted to perform my tracks, right? So in this weird combination of Reason and Ableton and a couple pieces of gear, I wanted to perform more, which ultimately tried to make things more tactile. I loved using my hands and the ability to do two things at once, grab a knob, grab another knob, and adjust those two parameters at the same time as opposed to clicking afforded me the ability to explore and get a bit more creative when it came to sounds as opposed to just I don't know of a way to put it, but essentially with a computer I feel like it's a little bit more destination based. You know what you want to do and what you want to manipulate as opposed to kind of exploring, at least for me and the way my brain works. If there's a ton of knobs here ready to go at any given moment, I can just grab it, turn it, and see what it does, as opposed to the computer, where you kind of have to, in a sense, decide what you want to grab first and turn. That sounds super heady and super dumb, especially me saying it out loud now, but that's kind of just the way that I enjoyed to work, was having a little bit more of a tactile feel, which allowed me to be a bit more creative and a bit more exploratory when it came to making music and finding new sounds. In that, though, this exploration of having a more tactile way of making music, the itch for more hardware started, because the ability to inject myself as a producer and as a human into this music that you're setting up in such a staccato kind of rigid way, but being able to kind of manipulate it as yourself was incredible. So kind of setting it up to do this, I fell in love. And as opposed to arranging a song, making sure my automation lanes look good, and that's the thing, like I would do stuff and be like, yeah, that looks good, when essentially it should sound good. And that's kind of what made me realize that I liked hardware, because it made me use my ears a bit more as opposed to looking at my screen and expecting to hear something before I even heard it. So this distancing between myself and the DAW really began, and I went ultimately just fully DAWless, recording to an old Pioneer tape deck, and then a 424, a 414, even just an old Zoom, whatever I could get my hands on that had a record button. I was all about it. But That's also where these realizations and these, like, I guess, revelations of the pitfalls of hardware began. But before we get into all that, let me tell you about this week's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an awesome platform that has classes on creativity, business, productivity, honestly, whatever you really want to learn, which is great for me because I've been wanting to learn to play more than that single chord that I know on the piano, because I got awesome things like this that I feel like I'm not really fully utilizing. So for me, I'm going to start taking some piano classes. I came across these awesome classes by Mark DeHeide on the subject, and hopefully that solves the trick. I find having a simple structure or routine to follow, like these bite-sized courses, is great for my brain as opposed to the free-form learning on YouTube, which usually just results in me walking to the fridge. Still nothing. Or another thing I often hear is that I just don't have enough time to make music, or I don't have enough time to learn anything new. Luckily for you, there's classes for that too. For example, Strategies for Starting by Mike Boyd. He tackles issues on how we're wired to learn.
I want to debunk this notion that people are born with a set potential that can't be changed.
It's nice to know it's not just us who have a hard time learning new things. And since Skillshare is sponsoring this video, if you use the link in the description below, you'll get a 2-month trial for free. The tracks that I would make fully DAWless outside of the MPC world and the laptop world were often just kind of odd and rough and unfinished, and I guess, for the lack of a better term, less professional than the tracks I would make in a DAW or an MPC. But it was so much more fun to work with hardware as opposed to the DAW, and it's fun as hell to work on an MPC. I mean, come on, you know me, I love my MPCs. This was probably a bad shot. Ignore these. So I think the reasoning for my lackluster productions when it came to making music DAWless was I was just ill-equipped to make music that way. Oh, I need a mixer? I'll just find some splitters and run everything into one another. Oh, I don't have a sequencer? I'll just play this in for 6 minutes. Oh, the mix is a little ugly. There's a party tonight. Do I really want to run this whole track again? I'll just call it lo-fi and go to this party instead. So in all these little hurdles, I was basically able to get about 80 to 90% there, but with all these other little needs and things that would have really boosted my DAWless productions or my computerless productions equated to a lot more gear. And in this moment is when I realized that the DAW is starting to look really, really good because it can do a lot of that. So it's that last 20 to 10% that keeps me up at night, if you will. And I talk about this a lot with my buddy Rhythm Droid, who also does a lot of hardware kind of productions, and it varies per person. He's more on the 80-20, I'm more on the 90-10. Essentially, it's making as much music as you can with hardware, DAWless style, but really finishing and polishing off your track in a DAW, whether that be arranging or mixing or just tracking everything in and having the ability to edit some stuff up where you might have screwed something up, and just, you know, it allows you to perform your track, have it there, and really minutely fine-tune things. And if everything's fine, just leave it as is and export it that way. Just use the DAW as a tool. And that's essentially the really important key word in that, is using the DAW as a tool. It's the same way I use one synth over another synth, one drum machine over another drum machine, because I'm utilizing them for their specific sound and a specific need that I need. And in some cases, I need the DAW to help myself get a better mix, or I need the DAW to arrange my song a little better. So the DAW can do a million things, and it doesn't have to do all of them at once. The same way as an MPC, the same way an Octatrack can be really confusing. It does a million things, but if you just focus in on one or two things, it does them really well, you can learn them really well, and you get comfortable and you start to get a bit more professional with your productions. So where does this put us in answering our original question, why go DAWless? To me, utilizing hardware has taught me so much about software. The limitations that hardware create manifest creativity within them, and without these creative hacks to overcome the limitations, I would have never have known how cool these creative hacks can actually sound. Because when it comes to software, there are almost no limitations. So taking these creative hacks and applying them to software has taught me so many ways of how to creatively explore sound. I hope I said that right. That was a lot of creatives and limitations. Hardware just electrifies me with inspiration in ways that I find a computer doesn't. But if there's ways that you can find to make your software a bit more tactile, whether it be MIDI controllers or something, or even a bit more enclosed in giving yourself some creative limitations, then you're pretty much off to the races. But this has been a long, one-sided conversation, and I want to hear where you stand on the subject, so let me know down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd greatly appreciate a thumbs up. If you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. If you want to support the channel, got some merch down below. And yeah, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for hanging out. Share the love, share the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Peace.